Hey, this is John Lee Dumas, the founder and host of Entrepreneurs on Fire. And if you're wanting to learn how to embrace change and navigate through disruption as a leader, then listen to the Leadership is Changing podcast with my good friend, Denis. He's prepared to ignite.
Welcome to Leadership is Changing. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change. This is taking your leadership to another level by finding the balance between executive excellence and personal well-being through stories that inspire real change. It's time to adapt in our fast-moving world when leadership is changing with your host, Denis Giannoutsas.
Hey, welcome to the show, Leadership is Changing. What we as leaders know to be true is that change is constant. Leaders everywhere confront similar obstacles because people are people, but everywhere you go, leaders are overwhelmed, disrupted, and under pressure. They run from email to email, meeting to meeting. Many leaders are not changing quick enough, which means they run the risk of becoming irrelevant and being left behind. The purpose of the show is taking our listeners' leadership to another level by finding their balance between executive excellence and personal well-being through stories that inspire real change. I believe we don't have enough effective leaders in the world today, and if we can get the leaders to step up and lead change, then they can inspire real change. Hey listeners, it's now time to adapt in our fast-moving world, and I want to welcome you to today's Mashup that I have for you. I have three wonderful guests. Before I go there though, please check out the Facebook group and the LinkedIn page. Leadership is Changing. Love to see you on those two different platforms. And also, we'd love you to share this episode with three other people. Feel free to go ahead and share it and share the whole podcast. We're getting wonderful feedback and reviews, and we'd love to have other people be exposed to the podcast. Okay, this episode, I have three wonderful guests from episode 56. Adam Lowy. He's the founder of Move for Hunger. Now, Adam's family have been in the moving industry for many years, I think about 3 generations. And with Adam, what he did is he realized that as people were moving homes or people were moving offices and things like that, a lot of food that were in fridges and freezers got wasted. And so what he's done is set up an organization to take that food and move it to those who are hungry, to those people who have not got food. And this is what he does in his organization. So that's Adam Lowy, and he's from episode 56. Now, episode 58 is Jodi Flynn, woman taking the lead. She's an executive coach, podcaster, author, and speaker. And I had the privilege whereby Jodi interviewed me for her podcast, and we talked about leadership and women in leadership. And so in this episode from 58, Jodi shares her thoughts about her favorite leader and why. Episode 59, Eric Skwarczyns is a great guy who is into various roles in media production, podcasts, and also videography and so forth. Now, he's also the podcast host of Preacher Boys, and wonderful man, as I said, and he shares his insights and thoughts about his favorite leader, whether alive or from history, and why. Team, if you're going to sit back, relax, take notes as these three individual guests are sharing certain things from that question, but sit back and relax and enjoy the mashup.
Hey, here's a really interesting question for you. So, who is your favorite leader? Now, this person could be alive or can be from history. So, who's your favorite leader and why?
That is a challenging one, I will say. But I'd say one of my favorites is probably Sir Richard Branson, and I think the reason why is I'm always inspired by the marketer in him. Seeing his story as like a dyslexic young boy and how he was able to start up all of these different businesses, many of which failed, but many have found success, while also maintaining his stance in terms of trying to create a better world and include some, social, really just that social responsibility into a lot of the core of what he's doing. So that mix has been very inspiring for me. And even as old as this guy is now, he's still going out and innovating and trying to build rocket ships. So it's really been amazing to see.
Yeah, he's a great guy, and great to see him out there on the front of the curve trying to do things and innovate and keep going, which is brilliant. Yeah, it's brilliant to see. Oh, thanks for sharing. That's a good one, Sir Richard Branson. Yeah. Look, I've got to ask you a question here now. Hearing from your background and that, you've probably got many but I'm going to ask you to choose one. And so who is your favorite leader? Now, this person could be alive or from history, but who is your favorite leader and why?
Okay, I do have many, but I did narrow it down to one. I did what I was told.
Good on you.
My favorite leader is Saint Teresa, who most people know as Mother Teresa, but she was canonized a saint in 2016. And what I admire about her is she was a force. And she was a force not because of her size, charisma, or a booming voice. She was small in stature, she was modest and humble, and she was gentle. And these are not the qualities we typically think of when we think great leader. However, because of her love, compassion, and her absolute conviction in the dignity of all human beings, she revolutionized how we treat the poor and the sick, and she became one of the most famous people who ever lived.
Yeah, awesome. That's fantastic. And they say that she could actually move air forces or whole armies and things like that of people because she was, as you said, very influential, great lady. And that's wonderful that you shared that because a lot of people share their, sort of people that we know and hear a lot about. But that's probably one of the first times I've heard somebody say Mother Teresa or Saint Teresa. So that's really quite cool to hear. So thank you for sharing that. Here's an interesting question for you. Now, I'm sure you may have several. Who's your favorite leader? Now, this person could be alive or could be from history. Who's your favorite leader and why?
So my answer is kind of non-traditional, but the person that comes to mind whenever I talk about influence or who shaped the way I think about just life and career and things is a filmmaker from Pittsburgh named George Romero. And it's perfect timing because it's Halloween season, but he directed Night of the Living Dead, which is like a, very famous film and was very progressive at its time because it had a Black protagonist. But what I love about George Romero is he was not a Hollywood filmmaker. He was a Pittsburgh filmmaker. And he made these movies out of his hometown with his friends and would create these incredible movies that became world renowned for the messages they had, the stories that they told. I mean, a guy from Pittsburgh making a movie that a Stephen King watches and says it, it scared him and made him feel like he was a bowl of jelly. Like, that kind of stuff's great. But even beyond just his like filmmaking prowess, there's two things that I really appreciate is one, he always had the things he was passionate about. So political views, social issues, they naturally flowed into his work. And, when he made Night of the Living Dead with a Black protagonist, people were like, oh, did you mean to tell this huge message and create this? And he said, no, he was the best actor of all of our friends. And I like the fact that he wasn't trying to be this faux progressive and push things forward. It was a natural outpouring of what he was already passionate about and cared about and the way he lived. And the next part of that kind of ties in, but I really love that even though he had small budgets and not the resources of, say, a Spielberg or somebody, he had people that would always follow him from project to project because they believed in what he was doing. And so I'm constantly thinking about Romero. And that's someone, even in high school, like reading books about him and listening to interviews, it was amazing to me that somebody who didn't have the quote unquote leg up built this massive kind of movement of people just because he was a good person with a definite vision.
Awesome. Yeah, and I think you're right. I mean, people following him from project to project more because of the fact that they believe in him and they believe in what he's doing, I think is really cool. And I can relate to the story because, this part of the world, in New Zealand, we had a guy who used to do films and it was a real budget and used to do it in the backyard or on the farm and bare feet and so forth. And then, Peter Jackson, Lord of the Rings, it's massive, right? And so it's really interesting how we also look at ourselves thinking, you said before, from Pittsburgh and, this guy and he's doing these films and then Stephen King says his comment, well, we think the same as well about Peter Jackson, he's a guy.
Right.
So it's amazing how for a lot of us, we think that we're in a situation whereby can we actually get into that global stage? Can we actually go and do something bigger? Are we going to be worthy to do it bigger? Or for some people come that imposter syndrome too. But it's really interesting how people do go and do it But it comes down to the one thing I think you said, which is the passion, right? That's that passion and that excitement. If they can share that with others, I think that's great.
Yeah, no, definitely. And it can happen both ways too. I mean, I grew up in California, so I was poised to be this, like it's kind of a joke, like I'm a videographer from California, but I had the opposite. And we always let our location or some other excuse say we can't do something. For me, it was, well, there's already too many videographers. There's already too many podcasters. There's too many people that are successful in California. I'd have a better shot if I was in a Pittsburgh where there's nobody else doing what I'm doing. But yeah, it's important not to let that imposter syndrome creep in because it's always coming.
Oh, listeners, what wonderful insights our guests are sharing from Leadership is Changing, the podcast. From episode 56, Adam Lowy. From episode 58, Jodi Flynn. And from episode 59, Eric Skwarczyns. He is sharing, she is sharing, and he is sharing wonderful, wonderful material. And hope you got a lot of notes out of that and some good insights. Hey, team, if you haven't already checked out the Facebook group and the LinkedIn page, love to see you there joining those different platforms for sure. Hey, and if you're already just joining to learn about the Leadership is Changing podcast, check out episode 00. That is the episode whereby I introduce the show. So go ahead and do that. Hey, listeners, what we as leaders know to be true is that change is constant. Change is incredibly scary, especially the unknown and the unfamiliar territory. It's time to adapt in our fast-moving world when leadership is changing. Hey, look out for the episodes as they've been released. Download them, have a listen, put a review and a rating. Feel free to share them with your friends, your family, your network. If there's any feedback you'd like to give me about the show, or if you have a question for my guests that I interview, or a question for the Ask Denis Freestyle episode, feel free to send me an email, dennis@leadingchangepartners.com. All right, team. Hey, thanks for tuning in. Until next time, bye for now.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Leadership is Changing with your host, Denis Giannoutsas. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change, inspiring executives and leaders to adapt and lead a bigger game in a fast-moving world.